This program is brought to you by Colgate. Brush twice a day for strong, healthy teeth.
Good evening, welcome to Simpson at 8. New Zealand Prime Minister Jacinda Arden has just completed a 4-day state visit to Fiji, where she had bilateral meetings with government and other stakeholders and announced a range of initiatives, including funds and partnerships to combat drug trafficking, climate change, and a New Zealand-Fiji statement of partnership. Someone who was not part of the official program for the visit but did meet with Prime Minister Arden is NFP Party Leader Professor Biman Prasad. Welcome to Simpson at 8.
Pleasure to be here, Simpson.
All right, good to see you again. How did the opposition get to meet with the New Zealand Prime Minister? Who arranged it?
Well, I think it was through the New Zealand High Commission and, of course, the Foreign Affairs Protocol. And we are very pleased to meet the New Zealand Prime Minister in the opposition office and have a very good discussion on a range of issues.
Okay, we'll come to the issue. So we did not see you at the state dinners and the welcoming ceremony. Were you invited to those?
Well, we were certainly not invited, and I'm told that our Cerebral Power opposition party was also not invited.
That's not normal before state.
Well, you have to ask the government, Stanley, why the opposition was not invited to the traditional welcome.
Usually
and also
they have been invited?
Well, usually we've been invited, in previous visits of heads of states and other dignitaries. But as I said, you'll have to ask the government why the opposition was not invited.
But we'll ask the government that. So what did you discuss with Prime Minister Arden?
Well, I think the range of issues, as I said, and New Zealand has always been a valued partner. So, we talked about, our long-standing relationship. But we also talked about, issues of governance, a state of our democracy and the role of the opposition and how the opposition is able to do its job in a parliamentary democracy. And so we did raise some of our concerns that we have raised publicly on many occasions.
What were some of the concerns?
Well, I mean, we've talked about the election itself and the recommendations of the Multinational Observer Group, of which New Zealand was part of. And we remain concerned about the lack of implementation of those recommendations and the changes in the legislations that were recommended through that and have also been recommended by the United Nations. As you know, many of the decrees that were used to run the military government remain in the Constitution under Section 173, and issues of freedom of association, the media laws, all these issues are very, very important, not only for Fiji, for any democracy, and we felt that these were issues that we needed to raise with a Prime Minister of a country which values democracy, media freedom of association, and many other issues.
I wanted to ask about that because it seemed in the statements that came out after your meeting that you're still complaining with the results of the last election, which was deemed by the Multilateral Observer Group as free and fair. So, what's the issue?
Not quite, Stanley. If you read the report, both the reports of 2014 election as well as the 2018 election, there are some serious issues that have been raised. For example, in the 2018 election, the Multinational Observer Group actually points out the vote buying tactics that were used right during the period of campaign. The 2014 report has a number of recommendations, and if you carefully go through those recommendations, you will see that the election was not free and fair on many accounts. So I think
it actually stated that the elections were free and fair.
Well, no,
the final conclusion was.
But they said the election was credible. They did not necessarily say that it was free and fair, because if you look at the recommendations, it shows very, very clearly that the election was conducted in a very, very unfair environment.
So, because this is what some people play, is that the opposition continues to flog a dead horse. Time to move on. Time to work into the next election. Yet you're still raising this. What did you expect Prime Minister Arden to do with?
These are very important issues, and I think New Zealand and many of our development partners know they have continued to support Fiji election process, in terms of technical assistance, in terms of people, because they know and they understood the recommendations that were made in the 2014 report as well as in the 2018 report, and they know that the environment in which the election was held was not free and fair. When they talk about a credible election, of course, they use other yardsticks, but they were very, very clear in identifying the processes, the things that happened during the campaign, which showed that it was not fair.
But I'll just point out, they've accepted the results of it.
No,
they've recognized the Fiji government.
That's fine. I mean, but it doesn't take away the concerns that they have raised and we have raised.
Okay. So you also raised issue about how Parliament works and the governance issues. What was the issue?
Well, as I said, the range of issues raised by other members of the team in the opposition, and we had a very good hearing, and I think the New Zealand Prime Minister understood where we were coming, and that's where the matter was left.
Okay. What do you want her to do with the information that you've given her? What do you hope she can do?
Well, as I said, New Zealand has always been a valued partner.
Pressure the Fiji government to improve?
They have always provided, technical support. They have always been concerned about the state of democracy in this country, right from 1987. And so it's our duty to, when we meet a leader of a nation which values all those issues, to raise what we feel are important issues here and concerns, and be straight up, because that's what we expect from New Zealand, and that's what we expect people here to understand. And we pointed out that Fiji, for whatever you might say, Fiji is not a genuine democracy by any standards. And it is fast becoming a model of dictatorship in the Pacific.
But what standards do you mean? I mean, we've had elections that been credible, and we are having a functioning parliament. We've got a government running. So how can you say we're a dictatorship when we have a democracy? The people have spoken.
Yeah, Stanley, that's correct. Election is just one element of democracy.
You're almost quoting Bainimarama there.
There are many other processes, many other structures, functions that determine whether you have a genuine democracy. For example, media laws. That has been pointed out constantly by the United Nations review on human rights. It's been pointed out by the Multinational Observer Group reports of 2014. So it's a very critical element of democracy that you have media laws that allow the opposition parties and those who are critical of government to be heard. Now you tell me, the sort of media environment we have in...
It may be a weakness, but it does not mean that we are not living in a democracy.
No, we may be living in a sort of democracy, but to claim that we have genuine democracy, which is what this government claims, that's going a bit too far.
Okay, we'll come back to that, because I'll talk about the internal Fiji situation in the course. But let us ask, just sticking with New Zealand at the moment and the visit by the Prime Minister, how do you see the Fiji-New Zealand relationship today? Government is stating that it is the strongest it has ever been, and I think Bainimarama is correct, exactly as the Prime Minister exactly. It sits at unparalleled strength. Do you agree?
Well, as I said, New Zealand has always been a valued historical partner for Fiji. It doesn't matter who is in government, who is the Prime Minister. Whether, it doesn't need Mr. Bainimarama's endorsement to say that we have a very good relationship.
Whoever it is, the relationship is strong.
The relationship has always been strong. New Zealand has always stood with Fiji, at times, during times of disaster, whenever we needed that help. But New Zealand has also been critical of Fiji's military coups, dictatorship in this country and the state of democracy. And so if we want to have a very good relationship with a country like New Zealand, then we got to look at ourselves too. We got to look at ourselves in the mirror at times to say whether when we say we have the best relationship with New Zealand, whether we are practicing, whether we have the values, whether we have the standards on which New Zealand operates, New Zealand democracy operates, and whether we have that there. So I think it's all right to talk about a very good relationship and what we do with each other. It's also important for us to reflect on what we are doing here.
Okay.
So reading speeches and saying good things are part of the diplomatic niceties, but I think we need to look at what's the situation on the ground.
So here's a point of view before we go to the break.
Sure.
Some say it's a more equal relationship now. Fiji is no longer being pushed around or lectured to as we have been with past PMs and foreign leaders, that the Bainimarama government has brought us off on the same level. Would you agree with that viewpoint?
Well, I don't think that's a fair assessment. I think as a country, the past leaders have had very strong leadership roles in the Pacific, right from the days of Ratu Mara and others. So every leader has had a period during which time, Fiji was always an important player. Fiji has always been the hub of the Pacific and has been a valued partner. So to claim that Fiji is suddenly, providing leadership in the Pacific, it's a bit too much, in terms of taking credit. But I think Fiji is an important player. Everybody knows that. Australia, New Zealand, other countries know that. And what we need to do is, when we say that we are important, we need to also reflect on meet the standards of what other countries expect us to do.
All right, you're watching Simpson 8. We'll be right back after the break.
This program is brought to you by Colgate. Brush twice a day for strong, healthy teeth. This program is brought to you by Colgate. Brush twice a day for strong, healthy teeth.
Welcome back. You're watching Simpson at 8. We're with Professor Biman Prasad, leader of the NFP party. Now, just continuing a bit on the New Zealand visit, two-way trade between Fiji and New Zealand at about over $1 billion. How can this be strengthened and improved? Is government doing enough to further trade with New Zealand? Well,
we ought to look at our own ability to export and look at particularly, agriculture exports and where we can increase our capacity, increase our quality. And I think we also expect New Zealand to understand some of the quarantine requirements. And I think those are all part of the trade negotiations that go on a regular basis. I think Fiji still has a lot of potential to increase its exports, but New Zealand has always been a very important source for our tourists. It's the second most important source. And again, when you talk about tourism, it's export of our services. So New Zealand remains a very, very important trading partner. And we can learn a lot of things from New Zealand, particularly on the ease of doing business. And in fact, our ranking has been one of the poorest, over the last several years. New Zealand is on top, and there are many lessons that we can learn from New Zealand. Its tax laws, its business processing laws, and all the requirements that are there. And I've said this before, that we need to improve our ranking on the ease of doing business, because that's what people look at when they look at Fiji
they want to come and do business.
Exactly.
So there was an agreement on funding for combating drug trafficking, 11 million, 2 million for climate change relocation. If you were the Prime Minister, what would have been some of the issues you would raise, some of the partnership you would like to see between Fiji and New Zealand?
Well, as I said, these are important contributions that New Zealand makes to Fiji. And as I said, this is not the first time. I mean, New Zealand has always been historically a valued partner in terms of education, in terms of health, in terms of New Zealand's historical contribution, which continues until today for the University of the South Pacific.
Right.
Which
benefits
Fiji in a big way. I think the area of climate change, 2 million is probably the start. There are very, very important considerations going forward for Fiji in terms of addressing environmental issues, long-term climate change issues. So those are areas where New Zealand would certainly always be ready to help. And I think the Prime Minister's announcements for help in that area is very important. And drug issue, I mean, Fiji is really fast becoming the drug capital of the Pacific. And we need to address that issue very, very urgently and quickly before it becomes a serious menace, not only for our people, but also for our economy as well.
That's right. Okay, so let's now come to Fiji's internal politics, which you are in the thick of things. And of course, the big action that was taken was the walkout of Parliament last week. Why did you walk out of Parliament? Well,
Stanley, it was very clear. We felt that the petition should have gone through. The reasons provided was not acceptable to us. You would recall that before the standing order has been changed a number of times through this government's majority. Before, when we didn't have 40%, when the opposition in the last parliament didn't have 40%, they changed the standing orders to say, no, you need 40% to get the petition to the committee.
Right.
Now, when we've got 40%, unfortunately for this government, after the 2018 election, the opposition has more than 40%. Now, once we had that, now basically, we feel that they are looking at other ways to stop the petition. Petition is a very legitimate process. It's part of the...
But also, this is the way Parliament works. The Speaker makes a ruling, you abide by the Speaker's ruling. Isn't that the way this works?
We respect the Speaker's position, but the opposition parties also have the right and the ability to disagree with the rulings and to suggest why the rulings may not be agreeable.
Sure, but don't walk out.
No, walkout is a very, very legitimate process, legitimate way to show our disagreement. And the Speaker himself said that, he's in his previous roles experienced walkout. Walkouts in parliaments throughout the world are a legitimate way to express one's disappointment and one's concern about how the parliament is run. And if you look at Fiji parliament, I mean, never in the history of this country, the Attorney General, who's also the Minister for Economy or Finance, who decides the budget for parliament, who is the Secretary of the party which is in government, who is the registered officer, and also the Minister for Parliament. And then on top of that, the Parliament, which has two constitutional officers, the Speaker and the Secretary General, get the advice from the Solicitor General, who comes under the Attorney General. So
you're not the first opposition party.
No, so there are structural issues. I mean, when you say Solicitor General always provided parliamentary counsel to Speaker and Secretary General, yes, that was the case. But never before, never in previous parliaments, the secretary of a political party which is in power, the registered officer of a party which is in political power, is also the Attorney General, is also the Minister for Economy, is also the Minister for Parliament.
Well, that's the government's prerogative.
It's not the government's prerogative to engage in conflict of interest. There is a thing called conflict of interest, Stanley, which is very, very paramount in governance. Now, if you have a conflict of interest,
where is the conflict of interest?
Because the secretary of the party which is in power decides the budget for the parliament, has the solicitor, is the Attorney General, the Solicitor General comes under his office, is the minister responsible for parliament. The perception out there, and we feel that, and there are some other issues that happened after 2014, for example, when the budgetary allocation for political parties was changed, opposition parties, small parties like us, we are really struggling. We don't have the resources. Because in the previous parliaments, the norm and the standard was that every political party would have a minimum of resources, a staff, research officer. Over and above that, you go by the number of members you have in parliament. Nothing like that.
Right.
The party like us, we have a small cubicle.
But you're not the first opposition party to complain about not having resources.
No. We are not. I mean, we are not complaining. We can't complain because these guys, in a very dictatorial manner, have made the decision. In fact, there is a thing called a House Committee. In 2014, there was no discussion. There was no discussion about how the budget is going to be allocated, how the political parties will. Because if you are an elected member, Stanley, you look at every other parliament in the world. If you are an elected member, you're not only working few parliamentary sittings. You are actually a full-time worker, I know, for the people. And
well,
every democracy.
More point on why you shouldn't walk out.
No, every democracy provides resources for members of parliament to be effective. When we were not in parliament, we were in Singatoka, talking to the people. That's part of the job. So parliament, sitting in parliament, raising issues is a very small part.
Yeah, it's an important part.
It is an important part, but it's not the only part. So,
yeah, so it's the official channel where
it is an official channel. There are other channels as well, because when you are an elected member of parliament, you are there for 24 hours. And parliament is just one part of the work that we do. So working out of parliament and going out and meeting the people whose petition was rejected for a reason that we believed was not right is a very legitimate thing to do in a democracy. What did you achieve? Well, we were able to listen to the people. We explained to them what happened. We have raised the awareness of the whole country. And I want to thank the media for
you raised the awareness, but there's also a view
amplifying that because if you're talking about climate change,
so in other words, what you're saying then,
is very
Professor
important.
Prasad, is that it was a political stunt.
No, it wasn't a political stunt. I mean, as I said, it's part of a politician's job. I mean, if you can't take a grievance,
because you raised awareness, you said.
You raised awareness because people are concerned about. If you want to effect a change in policy, Stanley, if you want to force a government to react to a particular, that is what the opposition politicians will have to do. They have to raise the issue. They have to educate the people, advocate on behalf of the people. That's when government responds. If we sit there quietly and listen to the government and they reject, then we can't do the job as a politician. So very important point about what the opposition politicians do, because we get the government to respond on behalf of the people. So if somebody comes to me and says...
So you felt it was a solid statement, not just a political drama on your part.
It was a solid statement. It was a very legitimate, well thought out strategy to bring the government to account for what they did and what the policies they're going to pursue. And that's the role of the opposition.
So before we go to the break, will there be more walkouts?
It will not be the last one. If we need to do engage in another
boycott. Is this becoming a common thing for Fiji politics?
No. It's a common thing for politics, for parliaments everywhere. And I think the fundamental thing, Stanley, is the opposition's job is to hold the government to account. And the media's job is to amplify the voice of the opposition to hold the government to account.
Because there's another thing, before I said we were going to go to break, but because there's another view that some have, is that this is a sign that you are running out of ideas and strategies as the opposition. Boycotts and walkouts is a sign that you're running out of options and struggling to operate effectively in the current parliament.
Well, actually, it's Stanley, it's the government which has run out of ideas. They've not only run out of ideas, they've actually run out of money. So what they're doing is they're running to the people. So if you see, as soon as the parliament is over, all the ministers, the prime minister, everybody is out there lecturing the people. For example, one minister goes and says to the people, you people cause increase in prices. There are ministers who are going around and lecturing.
That's isolated example.
No. This is what they do. They're going around and lecturing people about what is happening. For example, the Minister for Employment and Industrial Relations, I had the advertisement, going around gathering people. Ministers should be looking at these data they should have. They have officers everywhere. They should look at proper planning. They should strategize how to deal with these issues. When the hospital runs out of medicine, you don't go there and gather people and explain to them why you didn't have the medicine. That's the minister's job, to look at the planning, look at how the resources are allocated, where the priorities are, and deal with the issues. They are not doing that. That's why we are saying that they are running out of ideas, but they've also run out of money. And so, what they're doing is going around and placating the people by meeting them.
All right, we'll discuss this further. Don't go away. You're watching Simpson at 8. We'll be back after the break.
This program is brought to you by Colgate. Brush twice a day for strong, healthy teeth.
Continue to watch movies on the big screen with Colgate Monday Movies. Simply buy one movie ticket and present it together with one empty pack of any Colgate Total toothpaste or a Colgate 360 toothbrush and get another movie ticket free. Now showing in Damodar cinemas near you. Promotion begins 15th January and ends 15th November. Conditions apply. Check in-store posters for more details.
This program is brought to you by Colgate. Brush twice a day for strong, healthy teeth.
Welcome back. You're watching Simpson Debate with our guest this evening, Professor Biman Prasad, leader of the National Federation Party. Just going back a bit to the ruling that the Speaker made. What did you want the Speaker to do? What upset you about that ruling?
Well, we have written to the Speaker to reconsider the ruling, and in our case, we had two motions which we raised at the Business Committee, and we followed up with a letter to the Speaker to say that we don't believe that those two motions, in fact the motion was on education and health, and we felt that the motion was ruled out by the Secretariat for no good reason, and we wanted the Speaker to explain the reason, and we've written to him, and we are still waiting for a response.
What was his ruling, if you can give it in a nutshell?
Basically, the two motions that we had put in was not put to the Business Committee as part of the addenda, because they said, these motions don't meet the requirement, but we were not given the reasons. And so what we've done, as part of our respect for the Speaker's office, is to write to the Speaker, and we do hope that the Speaker will respond to us in time. And when we get to the next Business Committee, obviously we'll be raising those issues.
There's been, from your party supporters and opposition supporters, a bit of angst about the rulings by the Speakers. How effective do you think the Speaker is doing his job? And there's the talk that he's biased. Do you think the Speaker is fair in his rulings? Well,
I'm not going to make any comment on what people say on the social media.
These are your supporters.
Well, there are many supporters and people around, who say many things on the social media, so I'm not going to get into that. What I want to tell you is we have written respectfully to the Speaker on the issue, and we expect the Speaker to respond, and we will continue to raise these issues.
Okay, let me ask you another way.
Yeah.
What is your view of the work the Speaker is doing? How do you see the Speaker's
Well,
job?
we have our own views, and we express this through proper processes, and we have expressed this.
So you don't tell me, you just want to write it to him?
No, we express our disappointment by a walkout, by what we did subsequently after the walkout, by going to Singatoka, by raising the issue, and then writing again to the Speaker. And this is a legitimate process, and we respect the Speaker's office, and we will continue to raise our issues with him whenever we feel that there is a need to do so.
Okay, so I'm just want to say, respect for the Speaker's office means don't walk out.
No, again, as I said, that's part of the legitimate parliamentary process and a process to express one's disappointment or disagreement, and it's part and parcel of the democratic norms.
I think you made your point. Now, two more issues before we go.
Yeah.
Government's response to the coronavirus. How have you seen it?
Well, I have not said anything in particular about what I've followed what government has said and done with respect to the issue of coronavirus.
Do you think they've done enough?
Well, I think there are different views about when and how they should have done, but I think, as far as I'm concerned, the communication could be improved about what the government is doing. For example, this thing about Navua Hospital. The Minister for Health was not very clear initially, because
there was a lot of misinformation by some from the opposition.
Well, I mean, there could be misinformation. I don't know about that, but what I'm saying is, what appears to me is that the communication has not been very, very clear from the Ministry of Health in particular and the Minister and the government in it. So I think that has been improving, and we hope that the government would come out very clearly the way in which it's communicating with respect to policy. For example, the Prime Minister himself yesterday announced that those kind of communication is important, and they're good. And so we need to be very truthful about what we're doing and how we're dealing with it.
And what the situation is.
Yeah.
So we can't discuss everything, but final word, how do you see the economy going? Government says it's going well, that, given the circumstances. Well, there's downturn in the global economy, we have coronavirus, we have the trade, China is facing problems. So Fiji is doing as best as it can. How do you see the economy? And what do you think?
Well, I think the government was lying about the economy over the last 4 years. The whole economic mismatch.
What did they lie about?
They lied about what was happening in terms of the GDP growth, in terms of the business environment, in terms of the ease of doing business. And finally, we were hit by the reality, which meant that they had to reduce the expenditure by $1 billion. They did not collect revenue that they had forecasted, by $1 billion. We had a 1% growth rate. Now we have a double tragedy. We had a very result of a very poor economic management, low growth, and now we have the impact of coronavirus on the global economy, and supply chains, Stanley, these days are globally very, very integrated, and China has been a very, very important, part of that supply chain. And now most countries would be affected because, we can't source the materials, we can't source the raw materials, consumption goods. So this will have a very big impact on the economy, particularly through tourism. I mean, although the Chinese numbers are not that big, but I think the spending from the Chinese tourists was quite high. And of course, with the bushfire in Australia, so what is the real tragedy, Stanley, is that this government has actually been lying about the economy.
Okay, but they will be saying that you're the one that's lying.
No,
they're saying they've got the money.
No, I said that in Parliament. They haven't got the money. When you reduce the budget by $1 billion, when you don't...
But the government's running.
Government is running because we're still getting some money. But that doesn't mean that the government has the money for everything that they do. I mean, the government is not truthful about why they are not able to do this. Ministers themselves are admitting that there is not enough money for this, for that. So what we have right now is
Give me an example. I haven't heard someone...
Well, the Minister for Agriculture himself was quoted. Recently, somebody said, and we know because things are not happening. Things are not happening. So what we are saying is government should be truthful. The other important thing, Stanley, is this. When you have an economic downturn, when you have businesses struggling, when you have government struggling to collect revenue, you needed that space. So this government went on a spending spree, on a borrowing spree, and we don't have any space now, no physical space. So when we are hit by an external cause, which is the coronavirus, and through this global supply chain and through all these transmission mechanisms, our economy is going to be affected. Where we are, and this is why I'm saying the government must now come out truthfully, clearly, and say where we are in terms of our economic space, the physical space. And I would say that we need to have a serious economic summit to be able to bring the stakeholders and work out a strategy so that we can deal with this. This government has reduced the expenditure by $1 billion, and a lot of the reduction of that expenditure is health and education. No, health and education.
That happen in an economy,
but
that government reacts to situations they face themselves in.
This is the problem. This is a reactive government because the planning is very poor. They have
the point about the borrowing. Can I just come in?
Yeah.
The borrowing. They did invest that on infrastructure, on the roads, on things.
Yeah. So some of it.
It's borrowing, good, isn't
borrowing is not necessarily bad, Stanley. But when that borrowing is not used to create productive sectors, productive capacity, when there is wastage, through that borrowing, when it's used for consumption expenditure, then it doesn't create the productive capacity. But what you end up in the end is a debt which you have to pay. You know, for example, our debt servicing, if you work out the average per month, you probably need $50 million a month to be able to service your debt when you look at the interest and so what that means is that, people, you raise taxes, fees, fines, charges, and this is what has happened. People are reeling under the highest level of cost of living today. And now we are hit with this external thing.
Stuff, eh?
We are not ready. We don't have the capacity. So we need to sit down, have dialogue. This is a government which doesn't want to have dialogue with anybody. They think they know everything. And
so you think by talking to you, you'll come to
I'm not saying I'm not saying they only talk to us. We have talked about bipartisan committees in Parliament. They've never accepted any on issues even like on crime and drug. So we are saying that economic summit is not necessarily about the opposition. It's about getting the business people. It's about now the solution to addressing this economic decline, Stanley, is not just economic policy. It's political. It's about confidence. It's about showing the people where the government is going with its priority and its ability to deal with these issues. So let's and to build confidence, you need to have dialogue. You need to bring people together, and this is what this government should do now.
All right. Professor Biman Prasad, thank you for joining me on
Thank
Simpson
you.
at 8.
Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, thank you. That was Simpson at 8 for the evening. Join us again next Thursday at the same time. Good night.
This program was brought to you by Colgate. Brush twice a day for strong, healthy teeth.